See you today. Take your Bible, turn to the the book of Exodus, please. Exodus chapter 3 is where we are. Exodus 3, and we'll look in verse 17. Just so you know, Moses is on the Mount of God, standing before the Lord in the form of the burning bush. And they're having conversation, and the Lord makes it known to Moses in verse 17. This world today, disguised, that you'd be, number one, shocked if I were to explain it to you. And number two, I don't have the time or the inclination to do it right now. However, when we read the Bible, we understand that Israel was there for 400 years, enslaved. They didn't go in as slaves, but they certainly came out as freed slaves. Didn't take long for Pharaoh, according to the book of Exodus, when there came a Pharaoh that knew not Joseph, that had no respect for the fact that one of the sons of Jacob, Joseph, saved the land of Egypt through his godly wisdom. The fact that he was an interpreter of dreams and a man that walked with God and who was himself a type of Christ. It was that Joseph that, it's funny how generations get. It wasn't long before we had a few generations that didn't respect what Washington and Jefferson did. And now we live in a time where not only do people not respect what our founding fathers and the framers of our documents did and what they willed, they're actually trying to overturn them and bring us further, because we're already there, further under the manipulations and controls of socialism. 400 years have gone by. The cries of Israel have gotten to the ears of God. And God tells Moses to go do this thing. We're going to talk this morning on, as I said a moment ago, victory over Pharaoh. But the victory is going to come not just over Pharaoh, but as importantly, if not more so, than the four compromises of Pharaoh. If you don't know what a compromise is, it's actually from a Latin root, C-O-M, com means together. The word promise or premise comes from to consent, to binding arbitration. It's from the Latin promittere. And so the idea to consent to binding arbitration is what brings about compromise. And I do not believe that a Christian should ever become comfortable with the word compromise. Brother Ed Kay just brought me something after the Sunday school, and it's a letter or some kind of documentation on what's going on in Israel. It's probably somebody's opinion, and that's fine. I'll read it after. But if you want to know why the condition of the Middle East is, and the area round about Palestine, the Gaza Strip and all that, it's because man has taken it upon himself to try and bring about peace through compromise. Please listen to me. If you don't get anything else I say, if you're going to fall asleep in 30 seconds. But don't miss this. Peace never, ever comes from compromise. Ever. And so Moses goes to Pharaoh and he says, our God said that he wants us to take 3 days' journey and sacrifice unto him. And Pharaoh said, after, by the way, the fourth plague. He didn't say it after the first one. He didn't say it after the second or after the third. But after the water being turned to blood, and the land overrun with frogs, and man and beast overrun with lice, and then flies swarming a nation, of epic, literally biblical proportion. He comes up with this compromise, and the compromise is this. You have to turn to the 8th chapter of Exodus. Exodus chapter 8. And the Bible says in verse 25, and Pharaoh called for Moses and for Aaron, and said, Go ye, sacrifice to your God in the land. And Moses said, It is not meet so to do, for we shall sacrifice the abomination of the Egyptians to the Lord our God. Lo, shall we sacrifice the abomination of the Egyptians before their eyes, and will they not stone us? So Pharaoh comes up with this compromise, and it's a common compromise. It's a pretty smart compromise. It's an enticing compromise. And the compromise is this. We've already handled 4 plagues, kind of at the end of the rope. Really don't want to deal with this nonsense anymore. But I'll tell you what, Christian. I'll tell you what, Bible believer. You can do everything you want to do in your Christian life. Just continue to do it here in Egypt. Say, what's the problem? God said go 3 days' journey outside of Egypt. You're not going to do it in Egypt. Thank God Moses had enough sense to say, oh, no, we can't do that. Because our sacrificing unto the Lord our God is an abomination. And just in case you don't know this as a historical cultural fact, the Egyptians were staunch believers in reincarnation. They were staunch believers in pantheistic evolution. You see, and I don't even know why I'm going down this road, but I'll just say it and jump off real quick. There was a time when anybody that said they believed the Bible believed that God made everything that is in 6 literal consecutive 24-hour days. Biblical creation. But somebody in their wisdom said, why do we have to fight this fight? Is it a hill worth dying on? Why don't we just compromise with the science and we'll say, okay, we believe God made everything. We believe God's the creator. God's the intelligent designer. But what's to say that those 6 days were not days of 1,000,000 years each? And they came up with this horrific compromise of theistic evolution. They think that by putting the word theistic there, it makes everything okay. Now, once you start going down that road, you are done. You're cooked. Stick a fork in it. It's over. Once you start the road to compromise as a believer, you are done because it's a never-ending path. You say, you mean to tell me you believe God made the world in 6 literal consecutive 24-hour periods? Yes, I do. And I've said it before and I'll say it again. I do not believe in the heliocentric model of the solar system. I absolutely believe that the Bible teaches in over 70 places that it is a geocentric model. The earth is stationary and everything else revolves around it. Why? Because God said it. Well, science doesn't believe it. That's science problem, not mine. There are several instances in the Bible where God tells the sun, God says the sun stand still. You never one time see the earth being commanded to stand still. Why? Because it's still. Say, Pastor, I think you're nuts. Won't be the first time. And I guarantee you it won't be the last. You going to fault me for believing the Bible? Just because you're a compromiser, don't drag me into your quicksand. I believe this book, period. He said, Pharaoh said, serve God here. Now let me tell you what that looks like. What that looks like today is a person who hears the gospel, has some kind of spiritual or religious experience. They believe they're saved, but they literally do not want to change. They don't want anything to change about them. Oh, they want heaven. Did you hear what I said? They want heaven. They don't want hell. But they don't want to change anything about their current life. They want to keep doing whatever it is they want to do. They want to keep saying whatever it is they want to say. They want to keep believing whatever it is they want to believe. They want to keep drinking whatever it is they want to drink. They want to keep going to wherever it is they want to go. You get the point. Say, Pastor, that's contemporary Christianity. It is not. It's 4,000 years old of Pharaoh's compromise that, fine, you got God, you got your experience, great. Just stay here in Egypt and keep doing everything that you want to do for God, but you do it here. And you know why, Pharaoh? Do you know why Satan wants to keep you in the world? Well, there's a few reasons. Number one, as long as you're in Egypt, you got to do things according to Pharaoh's terms. This is his world, not mine. You understand that? Not only that, he owns the real estate. You know why they call it real estate? Because it's real. It's his land. It's not a land flowing with milk and honey. It's his land. He sets the terms. He sets the taxation. He tells you where you can build, where you can't build. He tells you how high you can build. He tells you everything. God forbid they make it a historical, certify it historical. Then they tell you what color it has to be, what color it can't be. They tell you what kind of wind. They'll tell you everything. Has it ever occurred to you that some men have no problem constantly dictating to other people? And many a Christian has tried to serve God without having any change, any fluctuation in their present current of life. Not only that, you are mandated to play by his rules. You know, when that COVID hit, I'll be honest with you, I wasn't sure how to respond. But I made it clear, crystal clear, I don't trust anybody. And I certainly don't trust this government. Now, I want to tell you, just so you know, from my lips to your ears, I love my country. I love my country. I consider myself a patriot. I'm not going to ask you to raise your hand, but if I did ask you, if you believe that this government right now today has your personal best interest in mind concerning your health, your finances, your ability to make a living, your health care, everything. If I asked you to raise your hand, I'm quite sure probably wouldn't have more than 5 or 6 go up in a room like this. Don't you see the disconnect? And at some point you have to ask yourself, why? Why is that? Because it's Pharaoh's. And he has taskmasters. Every morning when those Jews got up and went into the slime pits to make brick, to build the cities for Pharaoh and his family, if they didn't stomp fast enough, if they didn't cut enough straw, if they didn't make enough brick, if they didn't have the ovens hot enough, if they weren't doing what they were supposed to do, they felt the whips on their backs of those Egyptian taskmasters. Now, do you know why I bring that up? One, because it's literal and true. But two, because you and I are not living in a land called Egypt, but we're living in Egypt. It's the world. It's one of your three enemies. And do you know who the taskmasters are? It's the satanic warfare that keeps attacking you and getting you in a bad way. You say, my back is, there's no scars on my back from whips. Yeah, but what about the back of your soul? How many scars does that have? Oh, I don't think about it like that. Well, maybe you should. He's a taskmaster. And number 4, you have Pharaoh's prisons. You don't like the way he says to do things? They got no problem throwing you in prison. He said, you want to serve God? Sure. Serve God with your current music, your current immorality, your current smokes, vapes, liquor, lottery, bad attitude. You don't need to go anywhere. Just serve God just as you are. Whether you know it or not, that's Pharaoh's will for your life. Say, why would he do that? Because God can't bless it. Did you hear what I said? God can't bless that. What did he tell Moses to do? God said, Moses, I'm going to bless you. I want you to get the people, I want you to get your things, and I want you to go 3 days' journey, and I'm going to bless you there when you sacrifice to me. Do you understand the blessings and the sacrifices come together? I want to bless you there. Pharaoh says, no. You don't need to go 3 days' journey. Just stay here. And you know what Moses' choice was? All right, am I going to have the temporary blessing of Pharaoh, or am I going to have the heavenly blessing of God? And you know what's sad? Really, really sad? That most Christians choose the temporary blessings of Pharaoh. How sad. Jesus said, no man can serve 2 masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other. You cannot serve God and mammon. Pharaoh is more than willing to compromise to give you just enough rope so that you can hang in it later. That's how Satan works. That's how Pharaoh works. He'll continue to give you, my father used to say that all the time. I'll give you just enough rope to hang yourself. You know when you think you're all that, a bag of chips, and you're feeling your oats and you're thinking my father would say, oh, go ahead, I'll give you just enough rope so that you can hang yourself. Here's compromise number 2. Look at verse 28 of chapter 8. And Pharaoh said, I will let you go that you may sacrifice to the Lord your God in the wilderness. Only ye shall not go very far. Entreat for me. He said, I'll tell you what, I'll even give you an animal that you can sacrifice on my behalf, Moses. But here's the compromise. You can go serve, just don't go too far. I mean, now listen here. You want to, you got saved. You go to church. Make me a promise. Don't get too fanatical. I mean, Tyler, you're going to church. That's wonderful. But who goes back Sunday night? What kind of church is that? They have night church. What do you mean you go on Wednesday? That's a cult. That sounds like a cult to me. You sure it's not a cult? You don't think I heard the very same things when I got saved? What do you mean you're going on Sunday night? What kind of church has church on Sunday night? Pharaoh said, Moses, hey, you want to go? 3 hours, not 3 days. Say, why would he want Israel to go just outside the city? Well, the answer, I think, is pretty simple. Still within his reach. See, Satan doesn't care if you start to obey. He just doesn't want you getting too sanctified. He doesn't want you getting too right with God. I preached a sermon years ago on Satan's fishing rod. And I had a big bucket up on the platform. And I went to the dollar store. You know those little magnetic fishing rods you buy for your kids? And I had several of those lined up with the lines in the water. And I said, let me tell you how shrewd Satan is. Satan doesn't mind you having a religious experience or getting involved to a point. But the last thing he wants is for you to truly get right with God. He just wants you one of two places. Either toying with certain sin, just toying with it. Not under the control of it, not under the addiction of it, but just toying with it. I mean, you don't get victory of it all the way. Just, maybe a week or two just to make yourself feel good. Or keep it a secret sin. And here's why he does that. He lets you think that you're really in control. He wants you to think that that is really going to work. Say, but what's the problem? He's got control of the reel. I'm not a fisherman. I admit it, I'm not a fisherman. But I have seen people fish big things. And you know what? Sometimes you got to give it what? You got to give it some slack. You got to let it think it's not on the line. Let it tire itself out. And that's exactly what Satan does to Christians when they fall for this second compromise. Oh, that's your secret sin. Nobody knows about that. Oh, that really doesn't have control over you. You're going to be okay. Until the day. You know what that day is? What Paul calls the evil day in Ephesians chapter 6. When that evil day comes and Satan says, you know what? It's time. And he picks up that rod that has that particular sin at the other end. And he goes, bang. And you're like, where did that come from? It was in your heart the whole time. You just thought it was okay. You compromised and said, it's not hurting anybody. What could this do? It's not hurting anybody. And there's no more slack. And now you're starting to get reeled in. And you're like, wait a minute. I didn't plan on this happening. No, duh. Who would plan on it happening? But you're playing and playing and playing and playing. And compromise. Notice I'm not giving out any particular sins because I don't know what it is. It could be any number of things. He said you can go, but not out of my reach, not out of my jurisdiction. You can go, but there's going to be a curfew. You're going to have to come back. You can go love God, but I will define what loving God is for you. You can worship God, but I will decide how to define what worship is. The greatest compromise that happened in the last 70 years is that we've taken the word worship out of a biblical context and made it mean music. So that when people now use the word worship, they think worship has to include music. It doesn't. There's something like 75 or 80 references of the word worship in the Bible, and only 2 have anything to do with music. In other words, you can have just enough religion so you will shut up and feel good about yourself. Leave me alone. Here's compromise number 3. Exodus chapter 10. Exodus chapter 10, looking in verse 8. Moses and Aaron were brought again unto Pharaoh, and he said unto them, Go, serve the Lord your God. But who are they that shall go? He said, Moses, I'm considering letting you go, but who is it that's going to go? And Moses said, We will go with our young and with our old, with our sons and with our daughters, with our flocks and with our herds will we go, for we must hold a feast unto the Lord. And he, Pharaoh, said unto them, Let the Lord be so with you, as I will let you go, and your little ones. Look to it, for evil is before you. Not so. Go now, ye that are men, and serve the Lord. For that you did desire. And they were driven out from Pharaoh's presence. Here's compromise number 3. You can serve God, men, but you let Pharaoh keep your family. Do you know how many men I've known over the years that have set out to be a good, godly man and a Christian, but they get so caught up in their own life that they forget that their wives are flesh of their flesh and bone of their bone, and they leave their wives behind, and they leave their children behind? I know preachers that are so dedicated to the ministry that they spend no time with their wives, no time with their kids, and they make everybody, well, I'm just so dedicated to the call of God for my life. Let me tell you something, compromiser. You're nothing without your wife. You understand that? You better make sure that your wife is on board with you. You know how successful my ministry is? As successful as she is. I've never lost sight of that in over 4 years married. Do you realize that I'm only as successful as my kids are successful? Say, why do you say that? Because Pharaoh has no problem with a one-and-done Christian. Did you hear that? No problem with a one-and-done Christian, but God forbid you get the next generation ready to serve God. Can't let that happen. No way we can let 2 generations have victory. You can serve God, ye men, but you keep your family right here. And I know a whole host of men that have gotten so deep into the work of God and they left their families astray, left them behind. That's not the way it's to be done. It's a compromise. Say, what would you have me to do? Stay faithful and pray, and God will deliver them. I'm submitting to you this, that thank God Moses didn't accept that compromise. He could have taken all the men of Israel, went out and sacrificed to God, but they would have lost the whole rest of the Jewish nation. To who? To the Egyptians. To what? For the land and everything else. Here's compromise number 4. It's in chapter 10, verse 24. And Pharaoh called unto Moses and said, Go ye, serve the Lord, only let your flocks and your herds be stayed. Let your little ones also go with you. And Moses said, Thou must give us also sacrifice and burnt offerings, that we may sacrifice unto the Lord our God. You know how slick Pharaoh is? You know how slick Satan is? Pharaoh, Satan knows that you're not going to go far without your family. Eventually, you'll get beaten down. And do you know what else he knows? Compromise number 4. He said, all right, okay. You men want to go and you want to take your wives and your kids, that's fine. This is the 4th and final compromise. He said, you go, but leave all your finances right here. You leave your flocks and your herds. You leave your wallet here. I was talking to somebody just the other day and said, listen, when God has your heart, He has your wallet. He's got you lock, stock, and barrel. And Pharaoh said, go ahead, you go. Take your wives, take your kids. But you leave all of your financial interests right here. Say, what's the point? Simple. You can go. But you know what? Most people don't have enough faith to live without finances. You start pulling that dollar string, and let me tell you, you get people's attention real quick. He knew they weren't going to go far. He knew they couldn't last long. And you know what? Pharaoh said, you leave your finances here. Listen, I never, ever get into this subject that I'm about to broach. 40 years, I may have touched on it twice, maybe. However God has prospered you, you'd be a fool to leave it all for Satan's work. I don't care if it's $1. I don't care if it's a dime. You should have a dime that says, I want this dime to go to the work of God. Why? Because I can never repay Him with all that He's done for me. And I never preach on finances, and I don't ever preach on wills or bequeathments and all that. I never do that. But there's a principle here, and it's self-effacing. To be clear, Pastor Basu did not say you should leave everything to the church. I didn't say that. What I'm saying is, God gave you a brain, use it. Why leave it all? Whatever it is, say I only have $10, then take a tithe and leave it to the work of God. Do something. Say I don't want to leave it here, then leave it somewhere else, but give God something. The true service and sacrifice of God required flocks. It required a blood sacrifice. Moses was smart enough to say, if we leave our flocks and our herds behind, what are we going to have to offer God in the wilderness? God has taken out so many servants Satan has taken out so many servants by dividing their blessings, by dividing their heart. In closing, Satan is the god of compromise. Satan and Satan's prophets preach a compromised gospel. It's laced with works. And a compromised Christian life, it's laced with the foul smell of Egypt. But some of us in this room today, if you don't mind me saying, your life is littered with compromise because you won't put away childish things. You can't think without always defaulting to a position of compromise. When are you going to just believe the Word? Do it. Get compromise out of your life. That's the kind of Christian you should be. And if you don't mind me saying, that's the kind of Christianity the Lord Jesus Christ deserves. God bless the sermon to the heart of the hearer today. I ask God that you do something wonderful in our hearts and allow us to hear from you. Bless thou this invitation. By the way,